Thanks for watching and liking the video. I came home later than she expected, just enough for the house to feel off. Her laptop was open on the kitchen table, screen dimmed but not locked. Before I touched anything, a message preview appeared with her boss's name at the top. It said, "You sure he bought that story?" She walked in a second later, closed the laptop with one hand, and asked why I was home early. I didn't answer. I just watched how fast she pulled the laptop toward herself. She didn't look at me again, and I didn't push it. Before any of this, I lived pretty simply. I designed buildings for a mid-sized firm downtown, nothing flashy, but steady. I liked routines. I liked knowing that when I put effort into something, it held. That's how I approached marriage too. No games, no noise. Just two people building something solid. I wasn't perfect, but I showed up. I paid attention. I kept things calm because I'd learned early that calm solves more than pressure ever does. She used to say that was what she loved about me, that I made things feel grounded. She worked in marketing, always surrounded by people selling images of themselves. I figured home was her break from that world. I never tried to compete with it. I didn't see a reason to. Over the years, I kept my habits simple. I didn't jump to conclusions. I needed facts, not assumptions. Even when something felt off, I tried to give space before reacting. But I noticed she started carrying her phone from room to room, like she didn't trust it to stay still. She used to leave it on the counter for hours. Now she kept it face down, even during dinner. One night, she laughed at something on her screen. When she saw me watching, the smile disappeared so fast it barely existed. I didn't comment. I just noted the change. She said things were just busy at work, and I let that stand. I didn't push. I'd learned that if something is shifting, it shows itself without help. The first moment came on a Tuesday evening, nothing dramatic. We were both home early, and I was fixing a cabinet hinge that had been loose for weeks. She walked into the kitchen while talking on her headset, her voice a little too bright, like she was performing for someone. When she saw me, she paused mid-sentence, turned away, and lowered her tone so much I could barely hear it. I wasn't trying to listen. Her tone did the work for me. She ended the call quickly, almost abruptly, and started unloading groceries she hadn't mentioned buying. I didn't ask who she'd been talking to. I just noticed she kept her phone in her hand the whole time, even while opening the fridge with her elbow. It wasn't the phone itself. It was the way she made sure it never left her reach. I stayed quiet, finishing the hinge, letting the moment settle where it needed to. Some things don't require confrontation to be understood. The second moment came later that week when we went to a friend's small get-together. Nothing formal, just a few couples, some drinks, low music. She usually stuck by me at things like that, not clingy, just naturally close. This time she drifted around the room like she was waiting for someone more interesting to show up. I watched her from across the living room as she laughed at a joke someone made. She tilted her head the way she used to tilt it with me. It wasn't the gesture that got me. It was how empty it felt when her eyes flicked to her phone right after. A message lit up the screen, and she caught the glow reflecting on her glass. She turned the phone over instantly, almost too smoothly, like she'd practiced the motion. When she finally walked back to me, her smile was still there, but her attention wasn't. I asked if she was having a good time. She said, "Yeah, it's fine," without looking up from the drink she was stirring. She didn't notice I was watching her watch the door. I didn't jump to conclusions. I needed facts, not assumptions. But driving home that night, she sat angled toward the window, scrolling without reacting to anything I said. I let the silence play out. Sometimes silence reveals more than answers. We drove home in that same quiet, the kind where you can hear what isn't being said more clearly than what is. I didn't question her. I'd learned not to chase shadows. But the next break didn't come from a feeling. It came from a fact I couldn't fold into any reasonable explanation, no matter how patient I tried to be. She told me she had an off-site meeting that Thursday. Their team did those sometimes, strategy days, creative planning, stuff that didn't require much detail for me to understand. She said they'd rented a space near the waterfront, and she'd probably be back late. Her tone was casual, practiced. I nodded and told her to take her time. I wasn't trying to catch her in anything. I just wanted the truth to line up with the world around it. That afternoon, I left my own office to pick up materials for a project. Traffic downtown was slow, so I cut through a side street I rarely used. At a red light, I glanced to my right and saw her walking out of a cafe I knew wasn't anywhere near the waterfront. She wasn't alone. She stood with a man I recognized from one of her agency's events. Their creative director, the one she always described as demanding but brilliant. They weren't touching, nothing dramatic, but they were close enough that their conversation looked rehearsed, almost private. He said something that made her adjust her hair in a way she didn't do with me anymore. When she turned, I expected her to spot my car. She didn't. She was too focused on him. I didn't honk. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't even pull over. I just kept my hands steady on the wheel and let the light turn green. I'd learned not to react before I was sure. And now I was sure of one thing. Her story didn't match the scene in front of me. Not even close. When I got home later, she walked in about an hour after me, carrying the same tote bag she always used for off-site days. She said the meeting ran long and the team was exhausted. She dropped her keys on the counter and gave me a quick smile that didn't reach anywhere real. I asked how the waterfront looked this time of year. She said it was cloudy. She didn't pause. She didn't think. She just lied like it was muscle memory. I didn't press her. I didn't mention the cafe or the man standing too close. I simply nodded and moved a glass out of her way so she wouldn't knock it over. She thanked me without looking up. Later that night, while she answered emails in bed, her phone lit up again with his name, just for a split second before she turned it face down. She said she was tired and needed to sleep early. I said goodnight and waited for the last vibration to stop. I lay still, thinking about how some truths don't arrive loudly. They arrive quietly, and once you see them, you can't unsee the shape they make. The night after I saw her at the cafe, I told myself to stay level. Getting loud never solves anything, and I wasn't interested in scenes. But once a fact settles in, the world around it starts rearranging itself. I didn't have to dig. The next break came to me without effort, the way real answers usually do. She said she'd be working late again, another team deadline. I kept my voice steady and told her to take whatever time she needed. She gave me a smile that looked borrowed, like something she used on clients. After she left, I cleaned up the kitchen and tried to focus on a set of sketches, but none of the lines felt right. Around 8, I decided to drop off a document at my office downtown, something I could have done in the morning, but moving felt better than sitting still with thoughts that were already too loud inside my head. On the way back, I passed her agency's building. I wasn't there to check on anything. It was just the fastest route home. The lights on the third floor were on, her team's floor. I wouldn't have paid attention, except I saw two silhouettes near the window. One of them leaned in too close to be discussing strategy. When the taller one shifted, I recognized the posture. Her boss. He had a way of standing like the whole room was supposed to notice him. She was facing him, her shoulder angled the way it gets when she's trying to impress someone without making it obvious. She laughed at something he said. Not loudly, but enough that I could tell it wasn't the laugh she used with me anymore. I parked for a moment across the street, not because I wanted to watch, but because I needed a second to decide what to do. I didn't go inside. I didn't text her. I just waited until the two of them walked out of the building together. He carried her laptop bag, like it was something he'd done before. They stopped at her car. He said something that made her tilt her head and look at the ground for a second, almost shy. Then she touched his arm, quick and small, but real. I left before they drove off. There was nothing more I needed to see. When she got home later, she tossed her keys on the counter and said the night had been intense, but productive. I asked how late the team stayed. She said everyone left around 7. She didn't realize I was looking at the clock behind her. I let her speak. I didn't mention the window, the silhouettes, or the moment in the parking lot. I simply asked if she'd eaten. She said she wasn't hungry and went straight to shower. As the water ran, her phone buzzed on the dresser with his name on the screen. She didn't hear it. I did. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Some truths confirm themselves without help. She came out of the shower wrapped in a towel, humming like the night had gone exactly the way she wanted. I watched her move around the bedroom, picking clothes from the closet with that same lightness she used when she felt untouchable. I stayed seated at the edge of the bed, letting the moment breathe. I wasn't looking for a fight. I wanted clarity, not noise. When she finally noticed I was still awake, she asked if something was wrong. I told her no, my voice steady. Getting loud never solves anything. I just said we needed to talk for a minute. She hesitated, like she was flipping through a list of possible reasons. She sat across from me, folded her arms, and waited. I didn't start with emotion. I mentioned only what I'd actually seen. I told her I'd driven by her office earlier, not on purpose, but because it was on my way back. I said I saw her leaving with her boss around the time she told me the team had wrapped at 7. I didn't add anything extra. I didn't speculate. I just stated the fact. The timeline didn't match. She blinked slowly, the kind of blink people use when they need a second to build a story. She said he'd walked her to her car because the area felt unsafe. She kept her tone calm, almost professional, like she was presenting a pitch to a client. But it wasn't her words that caught my attention. It was the way she looked slightly past me while saying them, like she didn't want to lock onto my face for too long. I told her I also saw his name on her phone earlier that night. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just asked why he was messaging that late. She said it was urgent campaign feedback. The phrase sounded like something she pulled straight from a meeting agenda. Too neat, too polished. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list anything else. I mentioned just those two things, leaving the building together and the late-night message. I wasn't stacking evidence. I was giving her the chance to choose honesty. She took a breath and sat back, her shoulders dropping in a way I'd never seen before. Then she said it, quiet, almost rehearsed. She said, "You're overthinking all of this. He just appreciates my work, maybe more than you ever did." The words slid out like they'd been waiting behind her teeth. Not angry, not emotional, just final in a way she didn't seem to understand. I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. I let the silence answer for me. She stood up after that, said she was tired, and turned off the lamp on her side of the bed. She didn't ask if I was coming to sleep. She didn't look back. I sat there in the dim light, not chasing her, not pulling her back into the conversation. Some lines don't need to be drawn twice. She fell asleep fast that night, or at least she pretended to. Her breathing had that deliberate rhythm people use when they want the conversation to be over without saying it out loud. I stayed up, sitting on the far edge of the bed, feeling the distance settle between us like a piece of furniture that had always been there, but only now became noticeable. I didn't reach for her. I didn't try to fix anything. Fixing only works when both people care about the cracks. The next morning she moved around the kitchen with a practiced calm. No awkwardness, no apology, nothing that hinted at the conversation we'd had. She poured her coffee, scrolled through her phone, and asked if I needed anything from the store, like we were playing characters that hadn't read the same script. I kept my voice steady and told her I was fine. I wasn't trying to pull emotion out of her. I just watched how carefully she avoided looking directly at me. By the time she left for work, the house felt different. Not heavier, just quieter in a way that didn't come from peace. I went through my morning routine without thinking too much. Shower, emails, drafting a few notes for a project, but everything I did had an empty echo to it. I wasn't waiting for her to text. I wasn't checking the time. Distance has a way of teaching you what you no longer expect. That week, we moved around each other like we were sharing a hallway with a stranger at a hotel. She worked late 3 nights in a row. She didn't explain why, and I didn't ask. When she walked through the door each night, she headed straight to her office, not even pausing long enough to pretend she wanted to talk. I'd hear her typing, then silence, then the short click of her door closing again. She didn't hide it. She just didn't include me. One night, I woke up to the glow under her office door. It was past midnight. I walked down the hall quietly, not to spy, just to pass through on my way to get water. I heard her whispering into her headset, voice low in a way I hadn't heard in months. I didn't stop. I didn't stand there. I kept walking, let the sound fade behind me. Some things don't need a witness. Later that week, she fell asleep on the couch, phone still in her hand. The screen lit up with his name, just a preview, enough to see her boss had sent another late message. I didn't touch the phone. I just noted that she didn't bother to turn it over this time. She didn't care if I saw. That told me more than the message ever could. In the following days, we spoke less and less. Breakfast became silent. Evenings became separate rooms. She didn't ask where I was going, and I didn't ask where she'd been. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment. It was something colder. 2 people slowly stepping back without making a sound. The house didn't feel like ours anymore. It felt like a place we happened to occupy at the same time. The morning after she fell asleep on the couch, I woke up before the sun. Not out of stress, just a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in months. I didn't look toward the living room to see if she was still there. I didn't wait for her to wake up and ask where I was going. I wasn't moving against her. I was moving for myself. I showered, got dressed, and walked into the guest room. We'd always used it as storage, a place for boxes we never unpacked. I stood there for a minute, taking in the space. It felt neutral, untouched by the last stretch of quiet resentment. I opened the window, let the cold air in, and started clearing the room. I stacked old clothes into bags, moved extra furniture against the wall, shifted my books into a small pile on the desk. I wasn't creating distance from her. I was creating space for me. I didn't explain anything when she eventually woke up and saw the open door. She looked at the room, then at me, but didn't ask a single question. That silence told me she understood more than she admitted. At work, I stayed later than usual. Not to avoid her, just because being in my office felt easier. I drafted layouts, reorganized files, reset my calendar to focus on projects I'd put off. I wasn't escaping. I was choosing where I wanted my energy to go. When I got home that night, she was in the kitchen heating leftovers. She glanced at the time on the stove, then at me, then back at her plate. No irritation, no concern, just quiet acceptance. It was the kind of reaction people give when they've already replaced the version of you they used to hold space for. I started sleeping in the guest room that week. I didn't announce it. I didn't leave a note or make a point of anything. I simply placed my pillow on the smaller bed and closed the door behind me. She walked past the hallway once, saw the light on, and kept going without a word. She didn't ask if I was coming back to our room. She didn't ask why. Her silence wasn't anger. It was confirmation. I made a few other changes, small but real. I stopped waiting for her to eat dinner. I stopped pausing my day to match her schedule. I stopped checking if she'd be home late. My evenings stopped revolving around her absences. They just became evenings again. One night, as I was setting my phone on the nightstand in the guest room, she passed by the open door. She looked inside, saw the lamp, the made bed, my clothes folded on the chair. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it and kept walking. She didn't ask anything. And that, more than anything else, told me exactly where we stood. The shift between us became so normal that I stopped noticing the details. Or maybe I noticed all of them and just didn't react anymore. I wasn't waiting for a confession. I wasn't waiting for her to feel guilty. Life had already rearranged itself. But the final piece didn't come from her. It came from somewhere I didn't expect, at a moment that should have been ordinary. It was a Friday afternoon. I left work early because one of my clients rescheduled, and I figured getting home while the house was still quiet would give me a few hours to reset for the weekend. When I walked into the lobby of our building, I ran into a guy who worked on the third floor. I'd seen him a few times at community meetings and in the parking lot. Always friendly, always quick with a nod. He held the elevator for me, and we started talking. Nothing deep, just small talk. Then he said something that stopped me in a way I didn't let show on my face. He asked if my wife's agency had landed the new account yet. I told him I wasn't sure. He laughed lightly and said he'd seen her boss bragging about it earlier that day at the cafe down the street. He mentioned my wife too, said she and her boss were inseparable lately, always grabbing lunch together, always stepping outside at the same time. He said it casually, like it was office gossip he assumed I already knew. I didn't let my expression change. I kept my voice steady, just enough to stay polite. I told him I wasn't up to date on her schedule. He nodded, wished me a good weekend, and stepped off on his floor. When the elevator doors closed again, the silence inside felt heavier than anything he'd said. Not because his words shocked me. They didn't, but because they lined up perfectly with everything I'd already seen. It wasn't a new betrayal. It was the timeline snapping into focus. This had been going on longer than she'd ever admit. Longer than I'd allowed myself to consider. When I walked into the apartment, she was in the kitchen, talking on speakerphone. I recognized his voice immediately. They were discussing something about presentation flow, but her tone wasn't professional. It was lighter, familiar. She turned off the speaker the second she saw me, switching to her headset without missing a beat. She didn't introduce me. She didn't even acknowledge I'd come home early. She just walked into her office and closed the door, letting her laughter leak through the frame a few seconds later. I stood there, looking at her closed door, not angry, not jealous, just aware. Everything was out in the open now. Not because she told the truth, but because she no longer bothered to hide the shape of it. That night, we had dinner plans with friends, something she'd insisted on keeping, even though we barely spoke during the week. I decided to go. I wasn't trying to salvage anything. I just wanted to see how she acted when she thought she was performing for someone else. At the restaurant, she talked more than she had in days. She told stories, made jokes, played up the version of herself she liked people to see. At one point, when the conversation shifted to careers, she put her hand on my arm and said, "You know, he's lucky I chose him. I had options." Everyone at the table laughed. She laughed too, like it was harmless, like it didn't mean anything. I didn't respond. I let her take her hand back when she realized I wasn't playing along. By dessert, something inside the evening had settled completely. Not broken, just finished. I excused myself, paid the check quietly, and walked out without touching her shoulder or looking for her reaction. When she finally stepped outside, calling my name, I was already turning the corner. I didn't know her a scene. I didn't know her a goodbye. I just walked home, knowing exactly what I would do next. I walked home without rushing, unlocked the door, and turned on the hallway light. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't wait for anyone. I didn't go to our bedroom. I didn't check if she was calling. I went straight to the closet and pulled out every piece of her clothing I could reach. Jackets, dresses, shoes she'd bought for work events. Everything she'd chosen for the life she built without me in it. I didn't fold anything. I placed each item into boxes, steady and deliberate, the same way I'd draft a clean line on a blueprint. When I finished, I carried the boxes to the front porch. The night was cold enough that I could see my breath when I stepped outside. I set everything down beside the door, not scattered, just waiting. My phone buzzed once. Her name on the screen. I typed a single message. "You said I was lucky." "I agree. Lucky it ended now." Then I put the phone face down on the counter. I looked at the boxes one last time, turned off the porch light, and closed the door behind me. Thanks for staying till the end. What's your take on this story? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe. More true and hidden stories are coming soon.